Let's get started then. Welcome. This is the Finance Committee of the Maine Recovery Council. We meet monthly, and we can start with some introductions. I'm Benjamin Mann. I'm Deputy Commissioner of Finance at Maine's Department of Health and Human Services, and I serve as the treasurer for the Maine Recovery Council. Go over to Paul.
I'm Paul Vinsel. I'm a addiction medicine physician working with Spurwink, and yeah, that's it. And Mary.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Coyne. I'm the coordinator for the Recovery Council. I'll turn it over to Miles.
Did you say my name?
Yeah.
I did.
Sorry, at work. My name is Miles Willett. I'm a clinical supervisor at an outpatient treatment facility in Aroostook County, and also someone who is personally affected by the opioid epidemic. And I'll pass it on to Brendan.
I am Brendan O'Neill with the Attorney General's Office.
And I guess that leaves me. I'm Katrina Bonish, also with the Attorney General's Office.
Great. Pat, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Pat Kimball. I'm a Recovery Ally, and I am the current chair of the Maine Recovery Council.
Very good. So we can dive into the agenda. It is posted on the OAG's website under, you can find that. And we might have some other people to join as well, I imagine. But we start with a funding update. So for the month of July, it was there was very few transactions actually, but there was some minor reimbursement things as is normal for a couple $100. We got a small deposit from a settlement for $93,000, and most excitingly, we made the first payment out to a provider. So the Wellness Recovery Wellness Initiative received almost $218,000. But we started the month with 30.8 million and ended it with 30.7. If I'm not mistaken, that is the first time that the account has declined in balance in a month-over-month basis.
Ben, what was the amount of the payment to the Recovery Wellness Initiative?
It was the first payment. It was $217,821.
Okay, great. Just for the minute, so I get it right.
Thank you. Questions about the budget or anything that happened in July?
And what was the end of July budget?
The balance?
Yeah.
30,719,000.
Thank you.
And with where our finance meetings fall, I don't get updates. We miss it by about a week. So I will have August updates, obviously, the next time we meet. Very good. So moving along, we can cover, I don't have any special topics or anything, so we can cover what we need to cover here. But we can go through our standing agenda, which is what it's been for the last several months. Contract updates, anything you wanted to flag, Brendan or Mary?
Brendan, we can't hear you.
Muted.
Mary, I was asking if you wanted to go first or if you wanted me to go first.
Oh, you can go ahead. Thank you.
There are four-ish contracts that I've been working on with Katrina's help and with Mary's help. They are the two prevention contracts, which are for Mayan and for Peter Alfond to fund youth development organizations in Maine. There are the SSPs contracts that we talked about last time, which was helpful. And there's a contract we had Mary and I think Katrina had a phone call on Friday with Barry Dunn to talk about a little more specifics on their vendor contract. One contract that I was working on quite recently was the Peter Alfond contract, and to remind everyone with a little bit of context, because I always forget these things. With the Mayan contract, we were going to look at the Mayan's existing contract with the state and to try to see if if that contract and its deliverables, covered the same activities, and to provide them with flexible funding, as I understood it, beyond that. While I was out of the office, Katrina and I think Mary had a conversation with Beth Broderick at Mayan to share where we were with the contract. Beth sent to us proposed kind of what they would like to see for a scope of work. So that's very helpful. We have that in the house now, and we'll be working on that. The contract with the Peter Alfond Foundation is a little bit different because they don't have an existing state contract. And there are sort of two particular pieces about that I want to focus on. One is my understanding is the Alfond Foundation will provide subgrants. Its primary role is to provide subgrants to its learning network, which are a group of several dozen community youth development organizations that receive training and guidance and other help from three primary partners with the Alfond Foundation as part of a learning cohort. And the goal is to help these community youth development organizations, be open and available to, youth in Maine as a prevention technique. As part of the foundation's proposal about how to use its funds, it presented to, I think, the Program and Grants Committee in February, and it talked about the majority of the funds the majority of the subgrants going for things like capacity building, technical assistance, and leadership support for those learning cohort organizations. However, it proposed, a handful of other kinds of grants that I want to raise here to try to get some specifics on. One is they proposed allocating a small, let me find their language, a limited but meaningful amount of money to organizations that are not already in the learning cohort. I think to even, essentially to broaden a limited but meaningful funding for organizations that are outside of its current cohort, to presumably broaden its reach. Another proposal was, again, limited but meaningful funding for, let me pull up their language. This is for sort of pilot work, as they describe it. Pilot initiatives aimed at fostering innovative partnerships. And then similar limited funding towards research, and the way that the foundation describes that is, investments in data collection, research, and evaluation, which may include, supporting individual organizations' capabilities, engaging field level research or other related activities that will advance learning, continual improvement, and impact. over the last couple of weeks, we received from the Alphon Foundation, its input on what the scope of work should look like. So some of this I'm reading from that, as well as drawing in its presentation from February. But essentially, I'm trying to reduce those concepts down to numbers of what they can use their funding for. And so the way, just to start the conversation, I've structured it in the draft contract is, that the foundation shall allocate more than 50% of its subgrants for, those three primary activities: capacity building, technical assistance, and leadership support. And again, as I understand it, that's meant to be subgrants to its learning cohort of several dozen organizations. And that money would be, as I understand the council's intent, it would give the foundation substantial freedom to determine how to allocate those funds, to whom, for what. But essentially, that more than 50% goes to those three primary activities. Following that, I propose that the foundation can allocate up to 10% of its subgrants to organizations that are not already part of its learning cohort. It can allocate another 10% of its subgrants to fund the pilot programs that they that they talk about, again, for pilot initiatives aimed at fostering innovative partnerships. And then finally, I'm suggesting that the foundation can allocate up to 5% of its subgrants to the data collection, research, and evaluation piece. To add one more piece of information here, in February, the foundation proposed that, as I understand it, it intends to use 100% of its grant for direct funding of the things we just talked about, but that it would like to maintain a contingency, as they put it, an option to use, up to 11,500 for administrative costs related to the grant contract, should it determine that it needs to do so. That's, as I understand the number, substantially lower than, I think, the 10%. I could be wrong about that. Administrative cap that we've talked about. Alphon, the total funding is for Alphon is $575,000 each year for 2 years. So that's, I can't do the math on that, but in any event, I'm writing into the contract that, everyone understands that it intends to use 100% of its grant for direct funding, but we agree that if it needs to, it can use up to that 11,500. So this is a combination of things that the foundation proposed about how it would use this money, both in February and in its recent communication with us, and my effort to try to reduce some of that to specifics. So I want to pause there and get some reactions and feedback to how to describe or structure the uses of the funding that the foundation proposes.
Thanks for that, Brendan. That generally sounds all right to me. I'm fine with the contingency for grant administration. I think that seems like they're going to have to. We want them to do oversight, and they're clearly going to be spending time on administering the grants to their subrecipients, their subcontractors, their learning cohorts. I think so. That makes sense to me. Others might have other opinions. I think I would just say that the pilot projects for innovative partnerships and the research piece just probably needs a little bit more fleshing out and what that actually means. But those are my immediate thoughts there. Pat? Actually, before Pat goes, I'm sorry, Courtney and Sheriff Brackett, could you introduce yourselves for everyone?
Hi, everybody. My name is Courtney Gary Allen. I'm the organizing director of MIRAP and serve as the co-vice chair. Super quickly, while I have the mic, I just agree with Ben that I think we need a little more information on the two additional requests to allocate. They sound a little fluffy, I guess is how I'll put it.
Courtney, did you say you disagree or you agree?
Agree, sorry, agree. I want more information. They seem a little too fluffy for me. I don't know what they mean and what it will actually do to abate the opiate crisis in Maine.
And are we talking about both the pilot programs and the chunk for data collection, research, and evaluation? Okay.
Yes.
Todd, we could not hear you when you were speaking.
Of course not. Can you hear me now?
There you go.
I apologize. My name is Todd Brackett. I'm the sheriff in Lincoln County.
Thank you. Great to have you both with us. Over to Pat.
So can you hear me? This
Yes.
phone thing is driving me crazy. So I hate computers. That's all I have to say. So I think I have some of the same concerns that Courtney had. I think some of that can be flushed out with again, the whole full council doesn't know. There'll be a presentation, but there will be some evaluation process that we're putting in place for contract holders. And some of that will be flushed out, I think, when we develop those evaluation piece. But I do think we generously gave the money, and part of it seems a little, oh, well, we might use it for other reasons, but we don't really know what those are. And so I think they need to be a little bit more specific in regards to what they're doing with that before we can just say, it's like, and other purposes. I'm just not comfortable with that. That's a lot of money. So that's where I am with that. But I think some of that can be fleshed out with some of the stuff that we talked about today that the council will get a full report on in September.
Thanks, Pat. And, I'm hopeful that we can set up a meeting with the foundation either later this week or next week to get some more specifics about their work. In general, as I understand it, and Mary, you should jump in if you think that you have a better handle on the specifics here. But in general, my understanding is, the subgrants, and funding those several dozen learning cohort organizations is to be focused on providing, is to supplement the foundation's existing work to strengthen the capacity of those organizations to promote the healthy development of young persons in Maine through supporting things like youth physical and mental health, their connection with and sense of value to their community, and strengthening their support networks of adults and organizations throughout their community. I'm going to reach out to them and try to get more specifics about things like what do they mean by youth development? What specifically is the kind of work we're talking about? And to some degree, in drafting the performance measures, we want to look at, I think that the count, and we should get some feedback on this of the kinds of things that the council would be interested in hearing about that what the money was used for with the learning cohorts. In general, what I have for a concept with this is that they're promoting the idea of these youth development organizations as providing valuable prevention work simply by existing and providing strengthening and resilience activities for youth in Maine. But a lot of this is currently still broad and vague, and that could be, on the one hand, something that's valuable to the council. If the foundation already has its work going on, maybe the council wants them to have flexibility, to fund these organizations the best way they see fit. If you want more specifics, we can get into that.
Good. Thank you, Brendan. Any other thoughts on the Alfond or Mayan contracts or outcomes or goals? Did I get the percentages right, Brendan? Did you say 50% for direct subgrants for capacity building, technical assistance? And then up to 10 per,
Yes, so more than 50% for the capacity building, technical assistance, and leadership support subgrants, and then up to 10% for the pilot programs, up to 10% for new organizations that are not part of the learning cohort, and up to 5% for the collection, research, and evaluation piece. So again, I've structured this to do what I think the council was interested in, which was to give them flexibility to structure the subgrants in a way that makes sense for them. But I'm happy to get feedback right now about that.
I mean, this is just minor, but if there are 3 up tos, I think the other piece just needs to be 75% because if they can only go up to,
Yeah, sorry. Yep.
they could go over 75% by not going up to the 10% allocations.
Yep.
They can't go below 75%. It just seemed like superficially, it looks like they have more discretion than they do, but they don't, I don't think.
That was just a math error.
All good. Anything else on those? Very good. Anything on syringe service provider contracts or Barry Dunn that you wanted to highlight, Brendan?
Again, just to remind the council about the Barry Dunn contract, the council just very broadly voted, decided to spend up to 25% for Barry Dunn's work on the application process. Barry Dunn's going to be supplying its proposed deliverables for the contract about that. And that's what I have right now for that. That it's very broad, but I think that we'll be trying to make it more specific. On the SSPs, we have earlier in the month I had been working on a draft of that, working with Mary to make sure I have the right organizations. My understanding of the criteria for the SSPs that we've talked about before is, they need to be certified, they need to be operational, and in conversations with the CDC, we're also, including trying to contemplate how to include things like, safety checks if the organization is no longer certified, or if its funding is from the CDC for the SSP program is withheld, or issues like that. Mary, you may have more current information than I do, or a better way to describe the status of that.
I think that was a good overview. We will, as requested at the last council meeting, discuss tomorrow at Program and Grants the organizations who received allocation letters and who are intended to receive that funding. And I do know that Program and Grants wants to discuss in a little bit more detail, again, exactly what organizations those are and if there are any other considerations to include in that contract, specifically in regards to any changes in their status with the CDC and certification. But otherwise, nothing to add.
Actually, this is a good topic, a good moment to just confirm. As I understand it, in general, the goal is to have any sort of performance of financial reporting match match when the funding goes out. So if you get annual funding, you file reports annually. For example, the prevention contracts with Mayan and Alpha and the Alphon Foundation, those are annual contracts. So we're asking for reporting on an annual basis. Mayor, do I recall correctly that the SSPs are annual contracts and not quarterly contracts in terms of
Correct.
payment?
Yes, it is one, yes, I believe so. It is a one annual payment of 75,000. Again, I believe that's correct. There was some discussion internally if we wanted to require quarterly reporting, which I believe, and Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, that that's what the state requires. I do know that, jumping back to the youth prevention contracts, the annual payment matching and annual reporting felt the most appropriate to those two organizations, just given the variation in how they spend their money, based on the time of year, given how closely they work with students who go to school. So they told me that it would be more accurate and reflective of their work if they had the annual reporting versus the quarterly, which, during the summer months or around the holidays, we probably wouldn't see the type of reporting we would expect, but that would sort of even out over the course of the year. But I do think there is a question, and maybe this is something the Program and Grants Committee will want to discuss tomorrow, if we want to require more frequent reporting than annually for the SSPs.
Or for any other grantee?
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to keep the tempo or the cadence of the reporting the same or not, it's always, it's good for the council to, tell us.
Regarding my Mayan contract, I don't know what they have to report to the state, but I have to provide my numbers for the state-based contracts to Mayan by the 15th of every month. And then they compile it to report to the state. I don't know how often they do that, but I like the annual report for the Maine Recovery Council contract. Because my understanding that Mayan said to me is that they'll be able to provide this Maine Recovery Council money up front, which is different than what they can do for the state-based contracts. So we'll get $20,000 up front. And literally why that's so important as like a grassroots organization with my state contract with them, if I don't get my reimbursement, I actually am in this position right now. I'm supposed to cut checks on the 1st for my staff, and I haven't gotten my state-based reimbursement, and I don't have money to pay my staff. So if you guys, that's why those upfront grant agreements from you guys are just so important to grassroots orgs. So Mayan, if you're listening, please send that reimbursement so I can pay my staff. Thanks.
And just on that point, again, for both Mayan and the Alphon, the structure is we're giving those two organizations money to subgrant. And so those organizations are requiring their subgrantees to report up to them. And then those two organizations have to report up to the council. So there's probably some built-in lag. Paul?
I'm getting questions from people involved with syringe service programs of when I would think that they will get their checks from the Recovery Council. Do you have any estimate?
I hesitate to give an estimate because I'm often wrong. It's one of my top priorities, both for the council and in my non-council work.
All right, thank you.
Do we need more discussion? Are there other thoughts on the frequency of reporting? I presume, are we talking about financial reporting and outcomes-based reporting, or just financial reporting since this is the Finance Committee?
I was thinking of having them be at the same time.
Yeah.
So I would say both.
While we're talking contracts, I also was having a discussion with the youth prevention organizations about the period of funding, and if the council expects the money allocated to be used within the 2-year period, or if that money can extend to a 3-year period for when it's used, as deemed appropriate by both Maya and Peter Alfond. Does the committee have any recommendations or thoughts on how long these organizations have to use the funds?
So if you're talking carryover funds, I think we need to develop a process in which they can apply to request that. I don't think we should just, again, I think we have to know why, what happened. Again, was it on our end that we didn't get it to them? Did something not come in? And was it staffing issues? But I think they need to have a process to apply to carryover funds and how long they're going to keep them. Because the intent is to spend the money. It's not to sit there. And so for me, and it just may be me, I would like to see a process. Doesn't have to be lengthy. An explanation as to why they haven't spent the funds and when they intend to spend them. And then finance or somebody, we can find some process of approving or disapproving it. And if we don't approve it, they have to send the money back.
Courtney?
I agree with Pat with the small caveat that I think that this one in particular is a little different. Like if somebody gets money in the application process, they've told us what they're going to do and they were clear about the timeline and how much money they need. And if they can't meet that and spend all their money, they need to come back to us and ask us about how that's going to be different and ask for permission. I think that these contracts are a little bit different because we were just like, here's the money and here's your timeline. So I think that right now is their moment to tell us that it's going to take 3 years. I think if they can do work for 3 years with the amount of money that we gave them, great. I guess that's fiscally responsible and they're being thoughtful about how they're doing that. So I think now is their moment to set their timeline and to set their expectation. And then if they needed to go outside of that, they need to go into the regular process where they have to ask for permission. That was a really long way to say if Peter Alfond wants to spend the X amount of dollars we gave them over the course of 3 years, they should tell us now. And I would be fine with that. But if they tell us at 1.5 years, then I want them to have to go through a process. Do you think that's okay, Pat?
I do sort of. So again, it would be whatever the contract stated. So if the contract stated 2 years for me, then it needs to be 2 years. If the contract is 3, it's 3. And I'm assuming, again, it's one of those details do we have some sort of budget as to where it's going? I don't know. But again, my biggest concern is I have no problem with how you suggested, Courtney. My big thing is I just want agencies to spend the money the way they said they would. And if they're not going to spend it in that time frame, they need to tell us why and what the plan is to spend. Yeah.
We're saying the same thing, Pat. We're just saying them differently.
Correct. Exactly. Correct.
Yeah, I think this is the right time to raise it because we don't have a contract yet, but they're about to. And if the contract says they're going to get a contract that says 575,000 for 1 year, right? And then with another 575,000 for the second year, if they want to make that each 18-month periods, we're going to need to build that into the contract up front, or we could do a no-cost extension. But that would be down the road. And I hear Courtney drawing a distinction, which I think is appropriate on that. But I mean, I think the council voted for 2 years, so I don't know the process. I think it probably needs to just get raised up at the council meeting so that we can build into the contract to see what the council's comfortable with. But it'd be helpful to understand why, what's driving the fact that they want an extra year, extra time on this, or maybe they were just asking the question because they haven't spent any money because they don't have a contract yet, right?
Right. And as I recall, this is a little different from our application process in the sense that the council decided to give them a chunk of change, and perhaps it's more than they might be able to use, and that could be leading to the 3 years suggestion. Obviously we'll have to ask the question, get more information.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm entirely speculating.
because it's basically all sub-grantees. It's, I mean, 99% will be for sub-grantees. So I think, are they speaking on behalf of their sub-grantees that won't be able to do the work within the year? Or are they making some other determination? I'm not sure. Courtney?
I just want to say for the record, $575,000 now feels massive. It didn't seem so big when we made that decision in December, but with a year behind us, I'm like, wow, they're very lucky. I don't think anyone else is going to get that much money.
And this is again speculative, but I believe that conversation came up with Peter Alfond, knowing that they had a grant application that they were looking at, and based on the timing of when we could actually disperse the money to them and when that grant application was finalized, they were wondering if there was additional time. But as Brendan noted, we'll follow up with them to request more information, and if it feels appropriate to include a longer time period, we will do that and then bring that back to the council in September.
Are they going to have open calls for this money? That helps me frame this.
For the grant
We'll ask them.
application?
Yeah.
From what I understand, and again, this is just from conversations with Adam, that they are going to have a grant application that they will disperse to their cohort, their current cohort. But because they do want to have that additional funding for organizations outside their cohort, I do believe it will be a more open call, but I don't know the specifics of that, and I can request that from him.
Okay, I like that. That makes me feel less fluffy. So if they could provide more context around that's what they're talking about, and it's not just big words that I don't really understand, that would be helpful to me, and be able to explain it to the community better.
Great, we will follow up with him and get that information.
Although if they're having an open competition for the funding that we provided them, we just need to take that into account once we stand up the fourth pillar and do our own grant application process for the prevention pillar, right? So like the same organization could be funding. I mean, we can just build in a question into that and would need to, but I mean, we already have one built in, but it just sort of complicates it a little bit.
I have two other small things. One is, one may not be small. The small one is, I recently learned that, as I understand it, and I'm still looking into this, the Alfond Foundation is a Maryland-based organization, not a Maine-based organization. I'm not 100% certain about that, but I'm confirming it. Obviously, they do a lot of work in Maine. I'm not aware that the fact that it's an out-of-state nonprofit organization has been a concern for the council. And I don't know, like, I'm not aware of a reason under the council's organizing documents why that would be a concern. But I want to flag it in case it is a concern and see if there's any more information needed about that. One other issue that I don't know that the council has addressed squarely is whether one of the things the foundation's proposing to do with some of its, the larger chunk of money, capacity building, technical assistance, and leadership support, is to provide stipends to individuals to participate in some of these organization activities. And as I understand it, it would be, stipends to to youth who, have an interest in participating. In general, the council hasn't sort of addressed directly the question of providing funding directly to individuals rather than providing funding to support, create and support programs and organizations that provide the programs to make them available to individuals to participate in. You know, I think we'd have to do some work to try to understand the justification under the approved uses, and make sure it's evidence-based and those kinds of things. I'm and that could be part of our conversation with the foundation of, is there a way to do this work where you do, everything else, but, the stipend work, comes from another funding source, for example. This will be an issue, I think, in other council grants and requests. So I want to flag it.
Paul?
I don't know whose hands was up first.
As far as the Alphon Foundation being based in Maryland, I wasn't aware of that. Will it say in the contract that the money must be spent on opioid abatement in Maine?
Yes.
Okay. And I'd want to see some details on the stipend participation, because there's some giving funds or rewards to patients that is very evidence-based in the form of contingency management, but that's not really prevention. So I'd want to know what they mean by the stipend to participate in the organizational activities.
So I think I can speak a little bit to stipending young people. This is a practice that I've done for almost 5 years. I have 22 young people who are on a monthly stipend. They each are paid $100 a month. And in my framework, I don't know what Alford Center is understanding stipend work to be. But in our framework and in our organizing practice, young people are stipend for their work, not for their participation in programming. They are not patients or recipients of services. They are mini employees, I would say. So, I mean, I feel strongly that if young people or any people are doing work, that they are paid for their energy and participation in that work. My request through my end will include almost half my money going directly to young people, because young people are the ones that will be developing the naloxone training and then providing it in high schools. And I can't do that work ethically unless I give them money for doing that. So, I mean, at least in my framework, it's like you have a staff member, except they're very minimally paid. So I don't see it any different than us paying for a recovery coach at a recovery center. And the money that $100 a month to a 14-year-old kid impacted by the opiate crisis is the difference between having school shoes and not having school shoes for some of them. And this is their job. They see it as their work. They show up every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, depending on which caucus, to do work. And they plan events and they're working. So that would be my justification on why young people should be paid.
Pat?
I'm just going to 100% agree with Courtney. I think it's an investment. It's an investment. I think it fits in the MOU under education and workforce development and all sorts of things in there. I think that it places value on youth work, and it is the youth that are going to be the leaders in the future. And if we don't grow that and nurture that, it's a mistake. And so I absolutely think it's a valid use of funding. And as far as Harold Alphon is concerned, I mean, it is sort of strange to think that that organization is anything but Maine-based, but because the Alphons are everywhere in Maine. But again, we can stipulate in there somewhere if there's a concern that the work that they do with our funding has to be based in the state of Maine.
Yep, don't disagree on either of those points. I'll just say, I think we should get more information from Alphon Foundation, because when I hear stipends for, I think I heard participation, not work. And I think there could be some variance in there, especially if they're setting up learning collaboratives. Then envision people coming together once a month over the course of the year to discuss how, whatever the agenda topic might be, but that is a type of work, I think, but it could also be described as participation in some sort of ongoing process, not like the work that Courtney, you were describing. So probably makes sense to just get a little bit more information or spelling out what the stipends would be going for in those contracts.
I'd also be curious, as you're having this conversation with them, Mary and Brendan, could you ask them how they intend to stipend these people? Are they providing gift cards to Hannaford, or are they direct depositing $100 in people's bank accounts? Because that's a very different way of organizing with young people. And I would I would prefer that young people get access to cash and not Hannaford gift cards. And being clear about that.
Yep. And there's probably, I have no idea what the IRS rules are, but they can't be classified. I'm sure they can't be classified as employees, and stipends it's not a paycheck. So there's probably considerations there that they would want to pay attention to.
Yeah, there definitely is. And it's a fine line.
I know that or at least I've been told that, or I think that the Mayan youth prevention work is similar to work they're already doing under a state contract. And, I thought we would ask for a copy of that contract if we haven't already. Ideally, the contract would discuss the use of stipends as a technique. And so we'll look at that and see what information that provides.
Very good.
I think that's it for me. I'm sorry to keep bringing things up.
All good. I do want to I'd like to make sure that we continue the conversation around vendor support. Do you want to do that here, Mary, or do you want to do that later in the agenda?
Here is great. I just want to ensure we have about 20 minutes for grant consideration questions that have come up in my discussions with Barry Dunn. I just have some questions I need guidance from this committee.
Yeah, but we have 28 minutes or 38 minutes left. So those are the two, the LOI application and process there, and then vendor support are the two main topics that we have remaining. So I can turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share a couple documents. If Katrina, you can allow me to do so, that would be great. The first document I'll pull up is a document with an overview of roles and responsibilities that this committee discussed back in June. So I want to bring that back to all of your attention and also call out a couple key areas that I believe as coordinator we will need more support in, especially as we launch this grant application, and we know that will require far more oversight from staff. Katrina, I can also send you the document if that's easier.
It might be, because I'm having a difficult time figuring out where the right button is. I apologize.
No worries. Okay. Katrina, I just sent you both documents. The roles and responsibilities one is the one I'd love you to pull up first, please. And as Katrina's doing that, I can sort of speak to what the type of support that I feel we need most immediately. So with Barry Dunn on board to help us develop the grant application, from my perspective, I do feel like we're in a good place with that actual application, and they provided wonderful guidance and expertise on what the format of that should look like. Again, some key questions that will be discussed today as well as tomorrow with program and grants. And then some of the outline for us with the reporting requirements and grant agreements and helping to create templates for all of those things. And so with their support, I feel as coordinator, like I'll be able to use their input as well as all of yours to provide the guidance that we all need. When it comes to the post-award management, that's where I anticipate we'll need more support. So that comes with oversight of reporting for all of the prospective grantees. As of right now, I'm assuming responsibility for reviewing the December allocation reporting, which we've only awarded funds to one organization, so that hasn't become too overwhelming, but I do anticipate with the addition of the grant money that it will be quite the workload for one person. So I don't have a specific recommendation about hiring other staff or if we want to contract with an organization like Barry Dunn to help us with that. But I do think we will need that post-award support, which if you want to scroll down, Katrina, at the end, I've highlighted in blue the areas that I specifically think we need support with. So with this first grant management pre-award, again, that's where Barry Dunn is providing really helpful support for us. The award phase, at this point, I think Barry Dunn may be able to provide some of the support we need there, and that I can fill in the gaps. But then when we get down to the post-award phase, again, monitoring performance, financial management, outcomes reporting, evaluation reporting, that is a major responsibility and something that I do think we will want ongoing support to do. And if you can scroll down a little bit, Katrina, you can see the rest of these. We won't be doing invoicing, at least I don't anticipate we will at this point, but again, with budgeting, expenditure tracking, any sort of technical assistance that may be needed for our grantees, that's something I'm anticipating. And then if there is sort of the day-to-day communications that need to be supported, managing the grant documentation, helping to provide administrative support to ensure all of those documents are in one place, especially as we look to the transition of a potentially new council or at least a couple new council members in November. That's feeling particularly important. And then I also want to call out as part of that contract writing is a major aspect to any sort of funding allocation. And as of right now, Brendan is assuming most of that responsibility, which is no small task, especially when you have the workload that he does. And I brought this up to him last week because I don't know from the Attorney General's perspective how much involvement we can have, but I do, my recommendation would be that when the council's in a position to add staff positions, with the next legislature and provide that recommendation, that I do think a contract support position for the MRC specifically, and whether that's within DHHS or the AG's office, I don't have a real opinion or perspective on, but I do think the contracting piece is an essential component. So those are the big pieces right now. Again, really, once the council decides who will be receiving the grants, all of the next steps that come after that, and then the ongoing reporting, as well as the contract writing, which again, we're in the process of doing for the December allocations, and we're working to develop essentially a template for what we can use. But as you all recognize, and I know we have, especially within the 4 pillars, that can look really different. So it's not as easy as just providing a standardized contract for us, especially with the nuances and intricacies of settlement money and the way that Maine's is set up. So want to call those out now as what I'm seeing as the sort of primary contracting or staffing roles that we will need, and turn it back over to you, Ben, to facilitate.
Thanks, Mary. I think I saw Miles' hand first.
Hi, I'd like to make a, I don't know if we can, but make a recommendation, or I don't know if that's, I think that's on us. That we hire another Mary. Is that something that we can decide and give a recommendation to the council about, salary, at least, or from the financial part, but just to kind of get the ball rolling? Because once these contracts do start to come in and the data reporting and following of these things, I think we do need another person. And I'd like to make that recommendation. And just thoughts from the council.
Well, I actually, I think it makes sense to hire a team, like a consulting firm, because we need more than one person capacity, I think. But so sort of similar to the support that we're getting from Barry Dunn, that just can leverage, that has a deep reserve of resources, that we can dial up and dial down instead of posting and interviewing and everything like that. But that I actually think it's probably a both and, not an either or. But that's just my preliminary thoughts on that. But do you want to, so I know Miles wanted to put forward a recommendation to hire another contracted staff person, but can we go to Pat and Courtney to see sort of what the full thoughts are on sort of resources and support here for the council and come back to that recommendation? Miles, are you comfortable with that?
Very much.
Okay. Pat?
So in looking at Mary's review, a lot of it, again, it's sort of, there's administrative pieces, but there's a lot of financial knowledge sort of in there that it's included, if I read it right. And I apologize, my internet kept going in and out, Mary, so I only got parts of what you were saying. So again, the council does need help. I do tend to think contracting out with a team makes a lot of sense. And again, Mary position, the coordinator, would certainly be the lead with working with that team of experts in order to get that information out. In the meantime, I think what we have to do is really hone down that description of exactly what the ask is, what we're looking for. And then I don't know what you would call it, but placing it and putting it out to bid to be able to see what is out there and how much it would cost us. But I do believe it needs to happen, and it needs to happen sooner than later, because you'd be surprised once those grants get reviewed and out there, we're looking at a short time frame, and I'd like to be prepared, not unprepared. But I really would like a description. Mary's one there is very good, what she has there. But again, when looking at it, of course, it's hard to read it with small print, but most of it looked a lot of financial contract kind of thing, which is a very different background than Mary has. But we knew that when we did the job description.
Thanks for that, Pat. Courtney?
Sorry, Pat, if you already said this, my dog started barking, so I missed a little bit of what you said, but I agree that we definitely need help. I think that we need help in a way that we're not going to be able to staff to that extent. So the same way that Ben's talking about a contracting firm, I think we need a full team, a depth of knowledge, and a, you know, like at the city, we hired a law firm that has every type of lawyer that you could possibly have, but we don't have to pay for every type of lawyer you could possibly have. We just pay for a little bit of each of their time, right? So that's what you get with an organization that has a little bit of everything. I mean, I've so far have liked what Barry Dunn has given us. I mean, we'll continue to see what they can give us, but I would be interested in a conversation with them about, can they stay with us? Can they manage this? What does that look like? How much does that cost? Etc. But, and also, I think walking and chewing gum at the same time, I would like to have a conversation maybe in executive session. I think we have one coming up our governance meeting or something about Mary's contract, about what did we learn the last year? Is there an expansion of that role that we were not originally aware of? And does that mean a different title, a different compensation package? I don't want to go on, Mike, about all of this, but just like readdressing what our staff person is doing, and are we being appropriate with our support of that staff person?
Okay, we have a couple similar thoughts here. I think the one commonality here is that we want and need more support going forward. I think Miles, did you have any other follow-up thoughts on like an individual, like how we hired Mary versus asking for a team of support, sort of a consulting firm?
Not much. I like the idea of both. And I guess, Mary, where are you at? So I don't know what you're working for hours. I don't know. I feel like you're all over the place doing a lot. And I don't want to be selfish and burn you out. I don't, so where are you at? I know you've done, from my perspective, a hell of a job so far, and you've been in several different roles, and done quite a bit. So I want to make sure that we are supporting you. Yes, I think a team would be great. Pat and Courtney, you are correct when it comes to the data and the reporting and these and other things. These folks are experts, but do you need help, Mary? Do you think a side role or someone someone to help you out in maybe a lesser capacity, and we can maybe carve that out of what that job description would look like. But where are you at, I guess, is I want to ask.
Yeah, thank you. I do definitely feel like the workload is starting to exceed my capacity, just both in time and knowledge, in all honesty. And Pat and I have spoken about this, but the role that I assume on a day-to-day basis is quite different than the role I was hired for, which is perfectly fine. And I want to ensure that for both myself and future coordinators or people in my position, that I can provide feedback to the council so others know exactly what this role looks like. And so Pat and I have spoken about, connecting before that executive committee meeting, to ensure that I can kind of tell her what I'm doing and how that looks different than my original contract, and what type of support within that contract I feel we still need, and what may not be, as pressing for us right now with where we're at. I do think, let me give it some more thought and speak with Brendan as well, because, the AG's office has provided a lot of that support for me to be able to do my job, which has been very helpful. And I also know that there's a lot of other things going on in the AG's office. And if it feels appropriate to, hire a research assistant through the council specifically, I think that could be a possibility. And I will weigh in and say that I feel, from my work with Barry Dunn so far, it has been a really wonderful experience of being able to speak primarily to the council and then liaison with them as an organization that has a wide range of expertise and skills to pull from. And again, we'll see this through for the grant process, but I do think that model of having one or two key contracted staff and then hiring out an outside organization to support with the list of roles and responsibilities we decide are needed feels like a very manageable structure, especially given that there isn't the day-to-day involvement of the council like you'll see in other organizations, but having one coordinator and another staff person potentially liaison, I think will be the most effective way, and not put a managerial role on anybody to take up more time than is necessary.
Pat? Thank you, Mary.
So just a quick note, the Attorney General's office right now has been very generous with helping the council and everything else. Just a reminder that in 2 years, you will have a new governor. So I think that it is in our best interest to prepare ourselves for, looking in taking care of the council needs. Again, we could have someone as wonderful as Governor Mills and Attorney General Fry, and things will go just great. But the reality is there will be a new governor in 2 years, which means the players could change. And so this council needs to remember that. And when we're looking at structure about hiring, what is in our best interest, not just this year, but 2 to 3 years down the line.
Well, Pat, just to make that a little more complicated, there could actually be a new attorney general in January. And with that, hypothetically, a whole new attorney general office. Really hoping that's not the case, Brendan. But it could happen. So, oh, the thing I wanted to say was Barry Dunn is like well equipped to do this thing. So what they do with the ARPA grant is they communicate with the commissioner's staff person, Scott, and then Scott communicates with the commissioners, and then Barry Dunn just oversees all the grants that the commissioners have approved, right? And they receive all the financial reports, they receive all the reporting requirements, all of that, and then they put it together for the staff person, Scott, and the staff person gives it to the commissioners. So they're well versed in dealing with that type of setup.
Todd?
Can you hear me? I like the way that you've suggested, Ben. I think, I mean, we still have some research to do, some information to get, but I think the more we contract for services, the less impact a change in government will have on us potentially. I'm not opposed to employees, and certainly Mary's doing a bang-up job from my perspective. I would not want to lose her because of a change of administration, but I think it may provide us a bit of a buffer if I understand Brendan's explanation in the past of how, I guess my word, how autonomous or the autonomy of the funds themselves and the role of the council with regard to those funds. Just a thought for what it's worth.
Good. Thank you all. I think what I'm hearing is what I think makes sense to move forward is to pull together an announcement with the responsibilities that we want, and we can post that. I think we could send it to certain organizations that we're interested in applying, including Barry Dunn. I think there's a couple others that we've talked to Maine Community Foundation last summer. Public Consulting Group is another organization that could be used. Deloitte, it probably would be able to provide resources, but I think it makes sense to have at least a couple different options to choose from. And we can just, I think that document that you shared, Mary, that we worked on in this committee a little bit was, and outside of it, obviously, a good starting point. We could flesh it out a little bit, maybe put some resource levels next to it, like, 1 FTE or 40 hours a week expectation, or, and I do think, I think that will be very helpful going forward. And we can dial up and dial down that resource capacity. I think separately, we can have a concurrent conversation around whether or not we want to hire another contracted position, and or request, which we could do administratively whenever we want to. We would just need a process related to it. And if we're requesting state line positions, that has to be approved legislatively, and that's months away. So, does that make sense to everyone?
That does. And if it's helpful for the full council meeting, what I can do is pull together feedback from this conversation and adapt that document that I shared and provide a recommendation for what those roles may look like. And I can send it out to the committee in advance so that we can go from there at the full council meeting with a better overview of what exactly we're looking for.
That makes sense to me. I think we would look for a decision from the council so that we could get it posted, and then, because we're gonna have to go through a process to select a vendor. They might have to hire to staff up to actually provide us capacity. There's just a few process steps between actually getting additional capacity. But that's, I think we're, it's August. I think that's good timing.
I think as long as we have support by mid-November with at least the contracting and the reporting, then I at least will feel like we're in a better position. Right now, I don't feel like we are equipped to actually award grant money and have the support to do that process well.
Makes sense. I like it.
Great.
Did you have other grant and LOI issues?
Yeah, I do. I've got some questions for you all. And if Katrina, you can pull up that second document I shared, please. That would be great. So these are questions that, again, came up in discussions with Barry Dunn around the development of the grant application. We'll start with the first couple. One, will the council allow for equipment to be purchased with the community grant money? Or perhaps, Ben, if you have a better process for facilitating this, given the time, I'm happy to hand it over to you. These are the questions that I'd like to discuss.
Yeah, no, we can just tick through them. I think
Okay.
I think yes on equipment. Is there a reason why we wouldn't?
So the council, does have the ability to spend more on administrative needs. Like, I don't know what kind of equipment.
EKG machines. There's all sorts of maybe medical equipment for like treatment folks. I think
Like grants.
Like a
Like
car.
grants.
Like if someone needs a bus.
I see. Gotcha. I mean, at the end of the day, it's, just about identifying a evidence-based justification for it.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say yes. I mean, if your grant is about transporting people from one end of the state to the other to get to treatment, you need a car. So you would allow for the car to be purchased, I'm assuming.
Great. Will the council consider a match for funding above a certain tier? And this is thinking about if the council will do matching funds, if certain organizations apply, or subdivisions, or any other sort of matching grant.
Yes, but not require.
Yes. Correct. I agree with Courtney.
That's a braided funded conversation where I learned how you guys all figure out how to make $1 million detox beds, right?
So are you saying that within a certain tier of money that there has to be matching, or that you just want to know if there's matching?
Just to know.
I mean, that's a concept. So I was confused by the question a little bit too. I think that's a concept that we have not discussed at the council yet. Is this outside of the LOIs that have already been submitted?
Yes. And I'm trying to remember when this conversation came up with Barry Dunn. Let's disregard it for now and I'll get more information. And I apologize that it was confusing.
So Mary, when you ask the question, this is where I sort of stand with this. When an organization asks for $50,000, I want to know, is that $50,000 supporting the whole program, or are there other funding sources that support this program? So if the program cost $100,000 to run and we're giving you $50,000, where's the other 50 coming from?
Okay. That makes sense. And that has been, other funding sources is something that I've discussed with Barry Dunn, is ensuring we incorporate in the grant application. Will the council allow for subawards to others? So similar to the Peter Alfond Foundation and what we were discussing with youth prevention.
Yes, because we already have.
And will the council allow for indirect cost charges? I believe the
I mean,
answer is yes.
I just, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about that third one we already have, but that was like by design of how we set it up. So I think if the LOI envisions that they're just like a pass-through organization and they're taking something off the top, I wouldn't want to allow that. I think we would need to understand why they are subcontracting something out, right? I mean, the easiest thing would be like, there might be they're gonna subcontract out to a CPA organization for their financial reporting. That's very understandable. That's not really sub-awarding out to others, but like, I think there's probably just more, I think the answer is yes, but with like more understanding or some parameters in place on expectations.
I agree with Ben.
And then for the indirect cost charges, I do believe we've discussed that these will be allowed. And we've discussed that 10% limit, I believe, but let me know if I'm confusing that. Are there any other considerations or limits that we want to place on indirect cost charges above and beyond that percentage cap?
No, I do think there's a difference between what indirect can be applied for, though. I mean, this gets complicated, right? Like, if they're providing direct client services, like if they're running a SUD treatment facility, there's could be indirect on that. But if it's essentially like a contractor relationship, there is no like there's going to be no the good example is like for operating costs, basically for capacity building, there wouldn't be a 10% indirect on it. Like we're not, the SSP contracts, for example, there's not a 10% indirect built into that. We're giving them the 75,000 that's going to them is for capacity building, which like there's, we're not taking 75% off or adding 75% on that, or 10% rather, sorry, to the 75,000. Does that make sense?
I believe it does. Okay, great, thank you. And then for the budget, these are the recommended categories that I've discussed with Barry Dunn to include. Does anyone have any thoughts on these? Would you like to see any taken away as categories and or added?
Looks good to me.
Is
It's fairly
rent,
standard categories.
Mm-hmm.
what about rent? Or like utilities?
I can ask to include that, or Ben, I don't know if rent or utilities would fall under one of these categories already.
That's a good question. I can go back to some of the stuff that we pulled together a few months ago and compare that.
Okay, I will touch base with Barry Dunn about that. So, and then let you know if there's further questions.
Yeah. Paul?
Could you make another line there just to say infrastructure, which could handle rent and utilities and et cetera.
And I will ensure there's definition for all of these categories as well.
And then is there gonna be like a line where you explain the thing on the budget? Doesn't the state usually make you do that?
Yeah, and that's the next budget narrative question.
Okay.
Pat?
So if I'm reading this right, the largest award we will give is $1 million per year.
Based on the tiers as I understood them, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I will go back to double check that in the video. But these do represent for the tiers that we decided for the categories.
$1 million a year or $1 million total? That was mine. I think Ben and I had this whole moment where
Yes, it was total.
So that's for the 2 years, $1 million total.
Yes.
That's my recollection.
Okay, thank
If
you.
it was $1 million a year, we would take up half a pillar with one award.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well,
Okay, wonderful. And then for the last, according to your question, the budget narrative, yes, there will be a budget narrative that's required. The recommendation that I have and also Barry Dunn has is that we alter the budget narrative to reflect the amount of funding that's being requested. And we discussed this, I believe, in the last council meeting, that let's say for tier 1, those mini grants under 50,000, those will have far higher level questions asked around how the money will be used versus tiers 3 and 4 will have more detailed questions asked around the budget narrative. I wanted to make sure that the committee could provide any input or recommendations about specific questions or components that they wanted to see within the budget narrative at various tiers. If anyone had any thoughts about that specifically.
is there a question about sustainability, about what happens?
Yes, there will be.
Okay, thank you.
I would like
And
to know like how many staff they're hiring, at what point FTE, like are they a 1 full-time, 0.5 full-time, as well as how much they're paying per hour?
Okay. And tomorrow's Program and Grants Committee will also go through a list of questions. So please note these are just specific to the budget. And Program and Grants will be moving through more substance. Any other thoughts?
I think, our original budget contemplated about a third of the funding going out one time and 2/3 about going out ongoing. So I think a question related to if you receive this, it sort of gets at the sustainability question, but something like if you get one-time funding, like, do you still want these funds if we are only guaranteeing it that it's going to be on a one-time basis or something like that?
Oh, should there also be a question like, what I'm trying to answer is if somebody's asking for $100,000, these are random numbers, but 25,000 of it is for renovations, that's a one-time funding request and 75 is programmatic. Do we want to know that somehow?
Yes.
I'm mostly looking to Ben, who's the spreadsheet king.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do. I mean, I think that sort of gets into the question about whether indirect would actually apply or not, like, because if they're asking, like, there's no indirect on unless you're, I think if, we had some LOIs asking for just a portion of their rent being covered. So as opposed to actually deploying new or expanding existing programs. So I think we'll need to get at that somehow. I don't think we have the time to sort of parse that more, but I think that's the point of the budget narrative too, to describe, actually understand how the funds would be applied and it should be pretty obvious, but diving into that makes sense to me, Courtney. Anything else?
I also just want to note that it's not listed here, but in my discussions with Barry Dunn, we will have a couple of separate components in the grant if a for-profit is applying. And they've also recommended that we put language in the application regarding the tax liability of a for-profit versus nonprofit and how the council's money as grant money must be spent and what it cannot be used for. And those details I'll work out, but just wanted to give that heads up.
Sounds good.
Otherwise, I think that's all from me.
Very good. We are at time as well. Any other items for now or for parking lot for later? Miles?
So let's say we have $500,000 left. And we have, it's about the questions about the matching funding. And there's 3 great projects that are each looking for 200,000 apiece. Are we only going to award, like, is there going to be wiggle room to be able to say, hey, like the council has decided that we'd like to fund these 3 projects instead of the 2 at 250 or 200? Is there a way with that matching question that we're going to be able to maybe do that, or are we going to be real specific?
I think I think Mary will follow up with more context about the matching question. That's not a matching question in my head, but what I hear you describing is can the council, in as far as I am concerned, we can award less than what was requested because we want to fund more projects than we otherwise could afford within our existing budget. So if we had 3, using your example, if we had 3 projects and each requesting 200,000 and we only had 500,000 left, so we had 100,000 short, I think we could say, well, you each get 167,000 instead of 200 or something like that. And then we would have to negotiate with them or work with them to make sure that that was sufficient and how they would be amending what their plan was. But that, I mean, does that answer your question or?
It does. Sorry, and I'm French. Sometimes it's a little bit backwards. But I didn't know if we were going to have that kind of leeway or be able to work with folks in that regard. That's all.
It's going to be, we're going to make funding decisions and then we won't know what providers think and for weeks probably as we work with them to see if a lower funding amount can be still. So it's going to be a process to get those in place. So I think, we're just going to have to, anything that we don't fund at the level that they request, we're going to have to work with them to figure out what the funding level is. So there's going to be some uncertainty with this if we start adjusting award amounts, but we're going to have to do that regardless. There's going to be lots of detailed work related to this.
Got it.
Very good. We will call it good there. Thanks for everyone's participation this afternoon, and we'll see you at the next council meeting.
Wonderful. Thanks all.